Hi people, Moinowation back here again as always and as usual. I'm going to do another astrological chart, but similar to the wealth subject that I covered not too long ago. If you look in the top left corner, you can see what the question is. What are the spiritual properties of poverty? So I'm briefly going to discuss poverty from a spiritual and or esoteric perspective. So yeah, let's get started. The information that I'll be relaying are the general properties that people display or attributes personality-wise, as well as those in relation to conditions and circumstances, poverty being those conditions and or circumstances. So yeah, all of the things that I say apply to poor people in general. Now, you've got the Pot of Fortune, or you know what, let me start off with Saturn. Saturn is in Pisces, in Pisces' house, the 12th house, and it's conjunct the Ascendant, which is also ruled by Pisces, which stands for the fact that poor people, generally speaking, are mentally ill, to say the least. They have at the very least one or two mental disorders, or their poverty stems from deep-seated mental inefficiency and or inadequacy. And that essentially causes and or leads to poverty. One needs to remember that poverty is essentially simply the lack of spiritual abundance in that area. It's not a black and white issue, but people that are watching this know that people that are poor in general, like really, really poor, people that live either paycheck to paycheck or below, they're generally speaking, they suffer from a plethora even of, or at least a semi-plethora of mental illnesses, and that simply manifests as poverty. So that's what Saturn says. Now, moving on to the Pot of Fortune. Pot of Fortune is in the first house, the house of Aries, and it's in Pisces, which stands for the fact that essentially success in terms of getting out of poverty lies in a mentality. It lies in correcting the mental wrongdoings that are wrong with these people. So essentially healing oneself of mental afflictions and or illnesses, and that will automatically lead to an improvement in financial resources and whatnot. Next up, we've got Neptune going retrograde in Pisces in the first house as well. Again, that further cements only further supports and or cements what I already said with Saturn. People that generally speaking are poor, or people that are poor, 9 out of 10 times they suffer from mental illnesses, and this mental illness or these mental illnesses are the root cause of their poverty. For the rest, you've got Chiron in Aries in the second house, or the house of Taurus, going retrograde. Stands for the fact that these people more often than not have a tendency, they have a touch of greed about them. Doesn't have to be tremendously, but still they have a hint and or a touch of greed about them. For the rest, we've got the North Node there in Aries, also in the same house, obviously going retrograde, and opposed it, obviously, the South Node, which is in Libra, also going retrograde. Both of these simply stand for the fact that these people, essentially poor people, need to work harder to get themselves out of poverty. But that rarely happens, if at all, honestly. It happens rarely at best. We've got Jupiter in Taurus, conjunct the third house, the house of Gemini, going retrograde. It simply stands for the fact that these people are tremendously poor and that they suffer on a day-to-day basis. Uranus also going retrograde in Taurus, conjunct the Earth in the same house, stands for the fact that these people, generally speaking, have tremendous difficulty coping with unexpected expenses. So if something unexpected comes up for someone that lives paycheck to paycheck, all hell's gonna break loose. And the Earth indicates that they would like to have an abundance of financial resources on a day-to-day basis. We have got Lilith in Virgo, conjunct the Descendant, also conjunct Juno, both are in Virgo. The two of these mean is that these people that's why they're in the 7th house, the house of Libra, or the house that Libra has dominion over, just like the 2nd house. Now, obviously Venus ruling Taurus and Libra, that's what I mean. Now, both Lilith and Juno mean this, both Lilith and Juno, generally speaking, mean that these individuals have a tendency to leech off of others. That's why it's in the 7th house. Any person that they're in a relationship with, so any relationship, whether it be friends, acquaintances, lovers, you name it, anything, any person they know and they know well enough, they will try to ask that person for resources and or similar. That's why Lilith is opposed Saturn. It simply stands for having a leeching mentality, and that leeching mentality comes from or has its source or root in mental illness. Now, we've got Venus there conjunct the 8th house in Libra, as well as Pallas also in the 8th house, the house of Scorpio, also in Libra, just like the South Node. Now, Venus and Pallas mean that poor people in general, they view other people that have a bit more money than them as in being well off or being wealthy. And usually they also are under the impression that these people are more attractive than them or better looking. We've got the Sun, Mars, and Ceres in Scorpio in the house of Sagittarius, so the 9th house. This simply stands for the toxic spending habits that poor people have. Usually it's done out of impulse. That's why Mars is at its strongest. And it's done on a day-to-day basis from what little resources they can find. Think of someone that literally just blows their money the second they get their paycheck. The second they get paid by work, they immediately blow their paycheck and they start buying stuff left, right, and center. And it's done primarily out of impulse. This classifies as a toxic spending habit. That's what these 3 planets stand for. Again, the Sun, Mars, and Ceres. Ceres is an asteroid, of course, celestial body, not a planet like the Sun and Mars. And that's also why these 3 planets are opposed, both Uranus and the Earth. Toxic spending habits, essentially. Wanting to, for example, also, other than what I just said, also wanting to live above your pay grade. Usually people that live paycheck to paycheck or already don't make a lot of money to begin with, they want to buy something extravagant. Like, think of someone that lives paycheck to paycheck and a person wants a car that's $25,000 or euros. Yeah, they have this toxic consumer habits or consumer spending habits, plain and simple. And we have Mercury and the Moon, both in Sagittarius, both in the house of Capricorn, the 10th house, and both are conjunct midheaven, also in Sagittarius. Now, Mercury is on one of the weakest signs it can be in, zodiacally speaking. It functions moderately well in the house of Capricorn. So the 10th house, which stands for, like I said, these people have like a toxic, they have a toxic mentality of wanting abundance, essentially, which leads to making a bunch of bad decisions, usually reckless, impulsive decisions. Again, a reference to what I said earlier, toxic consumer spending habits, and the Moon also reflects that. Mercury essentially says the same thing regarding the toxic consumer spending habits, but from a mindful perspective, so mind-based, as in someone's thought processes. And the Moon says the same thing, but that's why they're next to each other. But from an emotional perspective, so poor people, generally speaking, have this tendency to blow their money from a mind-based perspective as well as an emotional perspective. And last but not least, we have Pluto in Capricorn in the 11th house, conjunct the 12th house, also ruled by Aquarius. The 11th house being ruled by Aquarius, of course. This stands for the fact that usually poor people have a tendency to be, how should I put it? To be reliant and or dependent on any establishment or individual or organization or entity. Of course, you could argue that the average person is, but with someone that's poor, it is a lot worse. So let's just say, generally speaking, they are reliant and or dependent on the system. Think of welfare recipients or people that get like disability checks and whatnot. I'm not talking about people that are like genuinely disabled or people that genuinely need the disability check or similar or welfare. I'm talking about the fact that, for example, people like that usually already live off of a fixed income and they have to make do with the bare minimum. So that's what Pluto stands for here. It stands for a well above average, because Pluto is quite strong, a well above average. We're talking about 2 to 3 times to 4 times even worse, arguably, in a matter of speaking, compared to the average person, being reliant upon the quote-unquote system. Let's just put it that way. Or being reliant on Uncle Sam, quote-unquote. And yeah, that's essentially it, people. So yeah, there you go. This is how poor people, generally speaking, behave. And the most important factors are all of these planets in Pisces, or that have a strong Piscean affinity about them. Poverty has its roots in spirituality, or pretty much like everything else, or not pretty much, like everything else. It has its roots in spirituality, okay? The base rule is worthless from the inside, worthless from the outside. So the problem in essence, almost always, at the very least, almost always with poor people is that they have a toxic mentality. They're mentally afflicted. They are usually, they lack the necessary mental faculties to be able to make a decent living, let alone more. And they usually suffer from mental disorders, at the both in general, or at the very least when it comes to finances and income. Again, I don't need a confirmation of anything. I've seen this with several people throughout my life. Usually when you look at someone that is poor, you can clearly tell that the person is not doing well. They are usually in a horrible and or horrid state of mind. They are not doing well at all mentally, and that negative energy or that lack of virtue simply manifests when it comes to finances on the material scale. So poor on the inside, poor on the outside. Poor in soul will automatically, being poor in soul will automatically lead to being poor in the material world. So that's it. Let me know if you have any other questions, and until next time, goodbye.